Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Collapse. Doug Woods had always prided himself on being unshakable. 20 years in the construction business had taught him to read people like blueprints, to spot weakness in both foundations and character. But as he sat in the sterile hospital waiting room, his calloused hands trembling around a lukewarm coffee cup, he felt his world tilting on its axis. Emma, his 10-year-old daughter, had collapsed during recess. The school nurse called it a sudden episode, whatever that meant. One moment she was laughing with her friends on the playground, the next she was unconscious on the asphalt. Doug had dropped everything, leaving his construction crew mid-pour on the Henderson project, and raced to Mercy General Hospital. The emergency room doctor, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, had taken Emma back for tests immediately. That was 2 hours ago. Doug checked his phone for the 100th time. No word from Tanya, his wife of 12 years. She wasn't answering her calls, and her location services showed she was at the Riverside Mall, probably shopping again, oblivious to the crisis. "Mr. Woods?" A young nurse with worried eyes approached him. Her scrubs were wrinkled, and she kept glancing back toward the emergency department doors. "Sir, I need you to call your wife right now. She needs to get here immediately." Doug's blood ran cold. "What? Why?" "No time to explain. Just hurry." The nurse's voice cracked with urgency. With shaking hands, Doug grabbed his phone and dialed Tanya's number again. This time she answered on the first ring. "Doug, what's wrong? I saw your missed calls. Emma's in the hospital. You need to get here now. Mercy General, Emergency Department." "Oh my God, what happened?" "I don't know yet. Just get here." The line went dead. Doug stared at his phone, then at the nurse who was still hovering nearby, wringing her hands. "What aren't you telling me?" Doug's voice carried the authority of a man who commanded construction sites and didn't tolerate evasion. The nurse glanced around nervously. "The doctor will explain everything when your wife arrives. The test results, they're concerning. Very concerning." 30 minutes later, Tanya burst through the emergency department doors. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, her makeup immaculate despite the supposed rush. She wore a new dress Doug didn't recognize and carried a shopping bag from Victoria's Secret. For a woman racing to the hospital for her daughter's emergency, she looked remarkably put together. "Where is she? Where's Emma?" Tanya's voice was shrill, but Doug caught something else underneath the panic. Was that relief? Dr. Patricia Hernandez emerged from the back, her expression grim. "Mr. and Mrs. Woods? Please follow me to a private room." They settled into uncomfortable chairs in a small consultation room. Dr. Hernandez closed the door and took a deep breath. "Your daughter is stable, but I need to discuss her test results with you. Emma has benzodiazepine in her system, specifically lorazepam. It's an anti-anxiety medication that's extremely dangerous for children and can cause the kind of collapse she experienced." Doug felt the room spin. "That's impossible. Emma doesn't take any medications." Dr. Hernandez pulled out a chart. "The levels are significant, suggesting regular exposure over several weeks, possibly months. This isn't accidental ingestion. Someone has been giving this to your daughter deliberately." Tanya's face went white, but Doug noticed her hands clench. Not the reaction of a confused mother, the reaction of someone caught. I don't understand," Tanya stammered. "Who would do such a thing?" "That's what we need to determine," Dr. Hernandez continued. "I'm required by law to report this to Child Protective Services and the police. This appears to be a case of child endangerment, possibly poisoning." Doug's mind raced. Lorazepam. He knew that name. He'd seen it before, recently. Where? It hit him like a sledgehammer to the gut. Tanya's purse. 2 weeks ago, he'd been looking for breath mints and found a prescription bottle with that exact medication. When he'd asked about it, she'd said it was for her nerves and that her doctor had prescribed it for her job stress. She worked part-time at a dental office, hardly a high-stress career. But why would Emma have it in her system unless? Doug looked at his wife, really looked at her. The new clothes, the perfect appearance despite the emergency, the way she'd been working late so many nights, the mysterious phone call she took in the other room. The pieces started falling into place with devastating clarity. "Doctor," Doug said slowly, "I need to speak with my wife privately for a moment." Dr. Hernandez nodded. "I'll give you 5 minutes. Then we need to discuss next steps." When the door closed, Doug turned to face Tanya. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the weight of a wrecking ball. "You've been drugging our daughter." Tanya's perfectly applied mascara started to run. "Doug, you've been giving her your anxiety medication to make her sleep so you could sneak out, so you could cheat." The accusation hung in the air like poison gas. Tanya's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. "How long?" Doug's voice was getting quieter, more dangerous. "How long have you been poisoning my daughter to cover up your affair?" Chapter 2. The Unraveling Truth. Tanya's composure cracked like thin ice under pressure. "Doug, please, let me explain." "Explain." Doug stood slowly, his 6'3" frame casting a shadow over his wife. "Explain how you've been drugging our 10-year-old daughter? Explain who you've been fucking while Emma lay unconscious in her bed." The crude word hit Tanya like a slap. In 12 years of marriage, Doug had never spoken to her that way. He'd been raised by a religious grandmother who taught him to treat women with respect. But respect was earned, and Tanya had just lost every ounce she'd ever possessed. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "Then tell me what it is." Tanya looked toward the door as if planning an escape, but Doug's presence blocked any exit. I met someone. At work. It started innocently, just coffee, but you decided to drug our daughter so you could sleep with him. Only gave her half a pill, just enough to help her sleep deeper. I thought it would be better if she didn't know I was gone." Doug's hands clenched into fists. In his line of work, he'd learned to control his temper. Construction sites were dangerous enough without hotheads swinging hammers. But right now, he wanted to put his fist through the wall. Better for who? Better for you, so you could whore around without consequences. Tanya flinched. "Don't call me that. What would you prefer? Child abuser? Because that's what you are, Tanya. You poisoned our daughter. She could have died." The truth of it seemed to hit Tanya for the first time. Her face crumpled, and she began to sob. "I'm so sorry, Doug. I never meant for this to happen. I love Emma." "Don't." Doug's voice cut through her tears like a blade. "Don't you dare say you love her. People who love their children don't drug them. They don't risk their lives for a quick fuck with some loser." A knock on the door interrupted them. Dr. Hernandez entered with a police officer, a tall man with graying temples who introduced himself as Detective Anthony Andrews. "Mr. and Mrs. Woods, I need to ask you some questions about your daughter's condition." Doug looked at Tanya, giving her one last chance to confess. She remained silent, still crying into her hands. "Officer, I believe my wife has been giving Emma medication without my knowledge or consent." Detective Andrews pulled out a notepad. "What kind of medication?" "Lorazepam. My wife has a prescription, and I believe she's been giving it to Emma to make her sleep while she—" Doug paused, choosing his words carefully. "While she conducted an extramarital affair." The detective's eyebrows rose. "Ma'am, is this accurate?" Tanya looked up, her makeup completely ruined. I made a mistake. I only wanted Emma to sleep better. I didn't think." "How long has this been going on?" Detective Andrews asked. Maybe 6 weeks." Doug felt something cold and hard settle in his chest. 6 weeks. 6 weeks of poisoning his daughter. 6 weeks of betrayal. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come to the station for questioning." "Mr. Woods, you'll need to speak with Child Protective Services. Given the circumstances, Emma will need to remain in the hospital for observation, and there will be an investigation into her living situation." The next few hours passed in a blur of forms, interviews, and devastating revelations. Tanya was arrested on charges of child endangerment and administered medication without a prescription. Emma woke up groggy but alive, asking for her mother with innocent eyes that nearly broke Doug's heart. As evening fell, Doug sat alone in Emma's hospital room, watching his daughter sleep naturally for the first time in weeks. Detective Andrews had given him preliminary details about Tanya's affair. The man's name was Kirk West, a pharmaceutical sales representative who frequented the dental office where Tanya worked. He was married with 2 kids of his own. Doug's phone buzzed with a text from his foreman. "Henderson, pour finished clean." Take all the time you need, boss. But Doug wasn't thinking about concrete or construction schedules. He was thinking about Kirk West, about Tanya, and about the fact that Emma could have died because two selfish adults couldn't keep their hands off each other. Doug Woods had built his reputation on delivering exactly what was promised when it was promised. He'd never broken a contract, never left a job half-finished, never failed to collect on a debt. And right now, Tanya and Kirk West owed him everything. Chapter 3. Building the Foundation. 3 days later, Doug sat in his lawyer's office, signing temporary custody papers for Emma. The sterile conference room smelled of leather and old coffee, but it felt more welcoming than his own home had in recent months. His attorney, Francis Brennan, was a sharp-eyed man in his 60s who'd handled Doug's business contracts for years. The good news is that with Tanya's arrest and confession, you'll likely get full custody, Francis said, sliding papers across the mahogany table. The bad news is that this is going to get messy. Her lawyer is already talking about claiming it was postpartum depression, even though Emma's 10 years old. Doug signed his name with deliberate strokes. Can he use that defense? They can try anything. But drugging a child for 6 weeks to facilitate an affair? No jury's going to buy a mental health excuse for that. Emma was staying with Doug's sister-in-law, Carrie Lawson, while the investigation continued. Carrie was Tanya's younger sister, but she called Doug the moment she heard about the arrest. I always knew something was wrong with Tanya, Carrie had said. But I never imagined this. Doug appreciated Carrie's support, but he knew family loyalty was complicated. Today, however, he had bigger concerns than domestic arrangements. After leaving the lawyer's office, Doug drove to the offices of Riverside Dental Associates. The building was a converted Victorian house painted in cheerful yellow, with a sign promising gentle care for the whole family. Doug had been here exactly twice, once when Emma needed a filling and once for Tanya's company Christmas party. He parked across the street and waited. At 12:15, a silver Mercedes sedan pulled into the lot. Doug recognized the man who stepped out from the DMV records Francis had obtained. Kirk West, 34 years old, married to Veronica West, father to 2 young children. He was shorter than Doug had expected, maybe 5'10", with the kind of artificial tan and carefully styled hair that screamed vanity. Kirk walked into the dental office with the confidence of a man who had no idea his world was about to collapse. Doug waited another hour before a red Honda Civic pulled up. He recognized the woman who got out, Michelle Craig, the office manager at Riverside Dental. Doug had met her at the Christmas party, a gossipy woman in her 40s who seemed to know everyone's business. Doug approached her as she walked toward the building. Michelle? I'm Doug Woods, Tanya's husband. Michelle's face immediately shifted to an expression of awkward sympathy. Oh, Doug, I heard about. Well, I'm so sorry about everything. I was hoping I could talk to you about Kirk West. Michelle glanced toward the building nervously. I don't think I should. My daughter almost died because of what he and my wife were doing. Doug's voice carried the weight of controlled fury. I'm not asking you to betray confidences. I'm asking you to help me understand how long this has been going on. Michelle looked around the parking lot, then sighed. There's a coffee shop around the corner. Meet me there in 20 minutes. 20 minutes later, Doug sat across from Michelle in a booth at Hometown Cafe. She stirred her latte nervously while glancing at the door. Kurt's been coming to our office for about 8 months, she began. He's a pharmaceutical rep, so we see him regularly. But about 2 months ago, I noticed he started scheduling his visits specifically when Tanya was working. What did you notice? They would talk for long periods, supposedly about dental supplies, but I could tell it was personal. Then Kirk started bringing Tanya coffee, small gifts. She began dressing differently, wearing more makeup. Doug felt his jaw tighten. Did anyone else notice? Dr. Stafford mentioned it to me. He was concerned about maintaining professional boundaries, but before he could address it, Tanya started calling in sick more often. How often? 2 or 3 times a week for the past month. She'd call an hour before her shift, claiming Emma was sick or she had a family emergency. So Tanya had been lying to her employer too, using Emma as an excuse while she was actually drugging her. The scope of the betrayal kept expanding. Michelle, I need to ask you something else. Kirk's married, right? Yes, very much so. His wife is lovely. She's come to a few office events. Veronica, I think. They have young children. Doug thanked Michelle and left the cafe with his mind racing. Kirk West wasn't just an adulterer. He was a family man willing to destroy 2 households for his selfish desires. And based on what Michelle had said, he was the aggressor in pursuing Tanya. That evening, Doug sat in his home office, surrounded by files, laptop open, and a bottle of whiskey he hadn't touched. The house fell hollow without Emma's laughter echoing through the halls. Tanya's absence was less noticeable. He realized now that she'd been emotionally gone for months. Doug pulled up Kirk West's social media profiles. The man lived his life online, posting photos of family vacations, business achievements, and inspirational quotes about success and integrity. The hypocrisy was nauseating. But social media also revealed useful information. Kirk coached his son's Little League team. He was active at his church. He had recently been promoted to regional sales manager. He drove a leased Mercedes and lived in an upscale subdivision called Willowbrook Estates. Doug opened a new browser tab and began researching Willowbrook Estates. Property values, homeowner association rules, recent sales. Then he looked up Kirk's employer, Meridian Pharmaceuticals. By midnight, Doug had compiled detailed profiles on both Kirk and Tanya. Their routines, their weaknesses, their pressure points. He'd learned that Kirk's wife, Veronica, was a pediatric nurse who worked at the children's hospital. She would be devastated to learn her husband was involved in drugging a child. Doug had built his construction business by understanding that every project required careful planning, quality materials, and precise execution. Revenge, he was learning, required the same approach. He opened a new document on his laptop and began typing. Project, Justice Phase 1, Intelligence Gathering, Complete Phase 2, Asset Positioning Phase 3, Execution. Doug had always been a methodical man. He built foundations that lasted decades, structures that could withstand storms and time. What he was planning for Kirk West and Tanya would be built the same way, carefully, thoroughly, and permanently. The only difference was that instead of building something up, he was going to tear their lives down, brick by brick, until nothing remained but rubble. Chapter 4. Gathering the Crew. Doug had learned long ago that the most complex construction projects required specialized subcontractors. Demo work needed explosive experts, electrical required licensed electricians, and plumbing demanded someone who understood pressure and flow. His current project, dismantling Kirk West and Tanya's lives, would require equally specialized help. His first call was to Garrett Jordan, a private investigator who'd helped Doug verify the backgrounds of potential business partners. Garrett was a former police detective who'd left the force after 20 years, trading his badge for the more lucrative world of private investigation. They met at a diner on the outskirts of town, the kind of place where truckers stopped for coffee and nobody asked questions about quiet conversations in corner booths. "I heard about Tanya," Garrett said without preamble as he slid into the booth across from Doug. "Word travels fast in law enforcement circles." "Then you know why I'm here." Garrett studied Doug's face. "I know you're probably thinking about doing something stupid. I'm hoping you're smart enough to let the system handle this." "The system?" Doug's laugh was bitter. "The system will give Tanya probation and therapy. Kirk West will get a slap on the wrist, if that. Meanwhile, my daughter almost died. So what are you thinking?" Doug leaned forward. "I want everything on Kirk West. Bank records, phone logs, travel history, medical records, business dealings. I want to know every secret he's hiding, every lie he's told, every corner he's cut. That's going to cost you. Money's not an issue." Garrett was quiet for a long moment. "Doug, I've known you for 5 years. You're not a vindictive man. You're talking about crossing lines here. They crossed the line when they poisoned my daughter. And what exactly are you planning to do with this information?" Doug met Garrett's gaze steadily. "Kirk West built his life on lies and deception. I'm going to show everyone who he really is." Garrett sighed. "I'll get you what you need. But Doug, be smart about this. Don't do anything that's going to land you in prison." 2 days later, Garrett delivered a thick folder to Doug's construction trailer. The contents were more explosive than Doug had hoped. Kirk West's financial records revealed a gambling problem he'd hidden from his wife. He'd been using company credit cards for personal expenses, including hotel rooms for his affair with Tanya. Most damning, he'd been selling prescription drug samples on the side, a federal crime that could result in prison time. This is how he got the lorazepam, Garrett explained. He's been skimming anxiety medication samples and selling them to people without prescriptions. Your wife wasn't buying it on the street. She was getting it directly from Kirk. Doug felt a cold satisfaction settle in his chest. Kirk wasn't just an adulterer. He was a drug dealer who'd contributed to poisoning a child. There's more, Garrett continued. I tracked his phone records. He's been having affairs for years. Tanya wasn't his first, and based on recent call patterns, she wasn't his last. The folder contained printed screenshots of text messages between Kirk and 3 different women, including a nurse at the hospital where his wife worked and a client from his pharmaceutical sales route. The messages were explicit and damning. One more thing, Garrett said. Kirk's up for a major promotion next month. Regional director position that would double his salary. The company's doing extensive background checks for the position. Doug closed the folder. Perfect. His next call was to Wendell Joyce, a man who specialized in a very different kind of problem solving. Wendell ran a small electronics business, but his real expertise was in security systems and surveillance. He'd helped Doug catch employees stealing from job sites in the past. I need comprehensive surveillance on 2 targets, Doug told Wendell over the phone. Audio and video, everything. I want to know every move they make, every conversation they have, every person they meet. That's going to require some creative installations. Are we talking about your wife and her boyfriend? Yes. Wendell was quiet for a moment. Doug, I heard about Emma. If you need this for legal reasons, to protect your custody case, I understand. But if you're planning something extra legal, I'm planning to give them exactly what they deserve. 3 days later, Wendell had installed micro cameras and audio devices in locations where Kirk and Tanya were likely to meet. The technology was sophisticated enough to capture clear video and audio from significant distances. The first recordings were devastating. Kirk and Tanya met at a hotel 2 towns over, apparently unaware that Tanya's arrest had compromised their secret. Their conversation revealed the true scope of their callousness. My lawyer says I'll probably get probation, Tanya said on the recording. A year of therapy and community service. What about Doug? Kirk's voice was clear despite the long-range microphone. He'll get over it. He always does. Doug's not the type to hold grudges. Doug paused the recording and laughed. It was a sound devoid of humor. Kirk's voice continued. My wife still doesn't know anything. As far as she's concerned, I've been working late on client meetings. What about after this whole thing dies down? Can we still see each other? We'll be more careful. Maybe rent an apartment across town. Somewhere Doug won't think to look. Doug stopped the recording. They were planning to continue their affair, even after nearly killing Emma. They felt no remorse, no guilt, no responsibility for what they'd done. But the most revealing part came 20 minutes later in the recording. I still can't believe you gave her that much medication, Kirk said. You said it would just make her sleep deeper. I said half a pill, Tanya. Half a pill once a week, not every night for 6 weeks. Jesus Christ, you could have killed her. But I didn't. She's fine. She collapsed at school and nearly went into a coma. That's not fine. Well, maybe if you'd found us a better place to meet, I wouldn't have needed to drug her so often. The casual way they discussed poisoning his daughter made Doug's vision go red. They were arguing about technique, not morality. They saw Emma as an obstacle to their convenience, nothing more. Doug had what he needed. Now it was time to start construction on their destruction. Chapter 5, Breaking Ground. Doug's demolition of Kirk West's life began with surgical precision. He learned in construction that the most effective way to bring down a structure was to remove its critical support points, then let gravity do the work. His first target was Kirk's promotion. Doug used an untraceable email account to send Meridian Pharmaceuticals' corporate compliance department a package containing Kirk's financial records, documentation of his unauthorized use of company credit cards, and evidence of his illegal prescription drug sales. The email was professionally written, presenting the information as coming from a concerned employee who wished to remain anonymous. Doug included enough corroborating evidence to make the allegations impossible to ignore. Within 48 hours, Kirk West was suspended pending investigation. Doug learned about the suspension from Michelle Craig, who mentioned during a chance encounter at the grocery store that Kirk had canceled all his appointments for the week. He seemed really shaken up, Michelle said. Word is there's some kind of corporate investigation. The second phase targeted Kirk's marriage. Doug had Wendell deliver a package to Veronica West's workplace at the Children's Hospital. The package contained printed copies of Kirk's text messages with multiple women, hotel receipts, and photographs from the surveillance equipment showing Kirk entering hotel rooms with various women, including Tanya. Doug had been careful to edit out any images that might identify Emma or compromise his daughter's privacy. This wasn't about his family. It was about Kirk's. The package included a note. Your husband has been having affairs for years. He's also been selling prescription medications illegally. I thought you deserved to know the truth. Doug watched from across the street as Veronica West opened the package in the hospital parking lot during her lunch break. Even from a distance, he could see her face change as she processed what she was seeing. She sat in her car for nearly an hour, going through every piece of evidence. When she finally started her car, she drove straight to Kirk's office. Garrett's contacts in the police department confirmed that Veronica West had filed for divorce that afternoon and obtained a restraining order requiring Kirk to stay away from their home and children. She also turned over evidence of his prescription drug dealing to the DEA, Garrett told Doug. Kirk's looking at federal charges now. But Doug wasn't finished. Phase 3 was the most personal. Using information from Kirk's social media posts, Doug learned that Kirk coached his 8-year-old son's Little League team and was scheduled to coach a game that Saturday. Doug arrived at the baseball field early, wearing a baseball cap and casual clothes that made him blend in with the other parents. He waited until Kirk arrived, then approached him near the dugout. Kirk West. Kirk turned, his face haggard from 3 days of professional and personal crisis. Yeah, I'm Doug Woods, Tanya's husband. Kirk's face went white. He glanced around at the other parents and children nearby. Look, man, this isn't the place. You're right, Doug said quietly. This isn't the place for a man who drugs children to be around kids. I never. You provided the medication. You told my wife how much to give Emma. You turned my daughter into collateral damage for your sick games. Kirk tried to back away, but Doug stepped closer. At 6'3" and 200 pounds of muscle built by 20 years of physical labor, Doug was an intimidating presence. Your life is over, Doug said in a voice only Kirk could hear. Your job is gone. Your wife has left you. Federal agents are going to arrest you for drug dealing. But that's just the beginning. What do you want? Kirk's voice cracked. I want you to understand something. Every day, for the rest of your pathetic life, you're going to remember that you almost killed an innocent child because you couldn't keep your dick in your pants. And every time you think about trying to rebuild your life, I'm going to be there to remind people exactly who you are. Doug pulled out his phone and showed Kirk the screen. It displayed a website, KirkWestTruth.com, featuring Kirk's photo and a detailed timeline of his crimes, complete with court documents, police reports, and surveillance photos. This goes live tonight, Doug said. Search engines, social media, everywhere. Every future employer, every potential romantic partner, every neighbor, and every place you try to live will know exactly what kind of man you are. Kirk stared at the phone in horror. You can't do this. This is harassment. I'll sue you. With what money? You're going to be unemployed and paying for lawyers for years. And good luck finding a lawyer who wants to defend a man who helped poison a child. Doug looked around at the baseball field, at the children playing and laughing. You know what the best part is? Your own son is going to grow up knowing his father is a child abuser. That's your legacy, Kirk. Kirk's composure finally broke. Please, man, I made a mistake. I'm sorry about Emma. I really am. But my kids don't deserve this. You should have thought about your kids before you started dealing drugs and fucking married women. Doug's voice remained calm, which made his words even more terrifying. You should have thought about Emma before you helped poison her. Doug started to walk away, then turned back. Oh, and Kirk, if you ever contact my wife again, if you ever come within a mile of my daughter, if you even think about trying to rebuild your life in this town, I'll make what's happening to you now look like a vacation. As Doug walked back to his truck, he could hear Kirk's phone buzzing with text messages and calls. The website had gone live automatically, and social media alerts were already spreading the news. By Monday morning, Kirk West's name would be synonymous with child endangerment and prescription drug dealing throughout their community. His coaching position would be terminated, his church membership revoked, and his neighbors would cross the street to avoid him. Doug had been methodical, thorough, and completely legal. Everything he'd revealed was documented fact, obtained through legitimate means. Kirk could sue for harassment, but he'd have to explain in court why being exposed for his actual crimes constituted harassment. Now was Tanya's turn. Chapter 6: Structural Damage. Tanya's destruction required a more delicate approach. Unlike Kirk, she was still Emma's mother, and Doug needed to be careful not to do anything that might negatively impact his custody case. But that didn't mean she would escape consequences. Doug's first move was financial. As Tanya's husband, he had legal access to their joint accounts and credit cards. Working with Francis Brennan, Doug froze all joint assets pending the divorce proceedings. He also canceled Tanya's credit cards and removed her access to their savings account. She'll have access to funds for necessities through the court, Francis explained. But her shopping sprees and luxury spending are over. Tanya learned about the financial restrictions when her credit card was declined at a boutique clothing store. Doug knew this because Wendell's surveillance equipment had captured her embarrassed and angry phone call from the store parking lot. "You can't do this," she screamed into her phone. "These are my cards too." But Doug could do it, and he had. Tanya was learning that actions had consequences, and her consequences were just beginning. The second phase involved Tanya's workplace. Doug didn't need to lie or manipulate. He simply had to make sure the right people knew the truth. He sent copies of the police reports and court documents to Dr. Marco Stafford, the owner of Riverside Dental Associates. The package included a professionally written letter. "Dr. Stafford, I thought you should be aware of legal proceedings involving your employee, Tanya Woods. Given that she has been charged with child endangerment and drugging a minor, you may want to consider whether she should continue working in a healthcare environment around children." Dr. Stafford fired Tanya within 24 hours. Not only was her criminal case a liability issue, but the revelation that she'd been lying about sick days and using Emma as an excuse made her continued employment impossible. Tanya's third blow came from an unexpected source: her own family. Carrie Lawson had been taking care of Emma during the investigation, and Emma had begun opening up about the months leading up to her collapse. The innocent revelations of a 10-year-old painted a devastating picture of Tanya's negligence. "Mommy used to give me special vitamins to help me sleep better," Emma told Carrie one evening. She said they were just for big girls who needed extra rest. "How often did Mommy give you these vitamins?" Carrie asked gently. "Every night before bed. But sometimes I felt really sleepy during the day, too. My teacher asked if I was getting enough sleep, but I told her about the special vitamins, and she looked worried." Carrie called Doug immediately. "The school knew something was wrong," she said. Emma's teacher noticed she was unusually drowsy and asked about her sleep schedule. Emma told her about the vitamins months ago. Doug felt his anger reignite. The school had been concerned enough to ask questions, which meant Tanya's drugging of Emma had been noticeable to trained professionals. Yet Tanya had continued the abuse for weeks afterward. Armed with this new information, Doug visited Emma's school and spoke with her teacher, Mrs. Charlotte Rhodes. She confirmed that she'd noticed Emma's excessive drowsiness and had documented her concerns. "I filled out incident reports 3 times, Mrs. Rhodes explained. Emma would fall asleep during lessons, which was very unusual for her. She's normally one of our most energetic students. Did you report this to anyone?" "I spoke with the school nurse and the principal. We discussed calling child services, but Emma always said she was just tired from staying up late reading. We decided to monitor the situation." Doug obtained copies of the incident reports, which provided additional evidence of Tanya's prolonged abuse. The reports were dated over a 6-week period, corroborating the timeline established by Emma's blood tests. But the most damaging revelation came from Carrie herself. "Doug, I need to tell you something," Carrie said during one of their meetings to discuss Emma's care. "I knew Tanya was having an affair." Doug felt his world shift again. "How did you know?" "She asked me to lie for her about 2 months ago. She said if you ever called looking for her, I should tell you she was with me. She claimed she was planning a surprise for your anniversary and needed an alibi. Why didn't you tell me?" Carrie's eyes filled with tears. Because I believed her. She's my sister, and I thought she was trying to do something nice for you. I had no idea she was drugging Emma. The betrayal ran deeper than Doug had imagined. Not only had Tanya been poisoning their daughter and cheating on their marriage, but she'd manipulated her own family into being accomplices. Carrie had been scheduled to testify as a character witness for Tanya during the custody hearing. Instead, she would now testify about Tanya's manipulation and deception. I can't support what she's done, Carrie told Doug. Emma is my niece, and her safety comes first. Tanya made her choices. The final phase of Tanya's demolition was social. Doug didn't need to spread rumors or lies. He simply had to ensure that the truth was widely known. He created a detailed timeline of events and shared it with their mutual friends, neighbors, and acquaintances. The timeline included court documents, medical records, and police reports, all public information that painted an undeniable picture of Tanya's actions. The response was swift and devastating. Friends who had known Tanya for years cut off contact. Neighbors who had previously chatted with her over backyard fences now looked away when she passed. The other mothers at Emma's school refused to acknowledge her presence. Tanya found herself completely isolated, unemployed, and facing criminal charges. She was living in a small apartment across town, subsisting on court-mandated support payments that barely covered her basic needs. But Doug wasn't finished. He had one more devastating blow planned for both Tanya and Kirk, something that would ensure they could never recover from what they'd done. Chapter 7. The Foundation Cracks. 6 weeks after Emma's collapse, Doug received a call that changed everything. Detective Andrews' voice was tense with urgency. Doug, we need to talk. There's been a development in Emma's case. They met at the police station, where Detective Andrews spread a series of photos across his desk. The images showed prescription bottles, cash, and what appeared to be a drug transaction taking place in a parking lot. We've been investigating Kirk West's prescription drug operation, Detective Andrews explained. What we found is bigger than we initially thought. Kirk wasn't just selling samples. He was running a full distribution network. Doug studied the photos. What does this have to do with Emma? Kirk was selling lorazepam and other controlled substances to at least 15 people in the area. But here's the thing. Some of his clients were parents. The implication hit Doug like a physical blow. Other children. We've identified at least 3 other cases where parents were giving their children unprescribed medication obtained from Kirk West. 2 were using it to control ADHD symptoms without proper medical supervision. 1 was using it exactly like your wife, to make their child sleep deeper during parental activities they wanted to hide. Detective Andrews pulled out another file. The other child who was being drugged for parental convenience? She's 6 years old. She's been hospitalized twice in the past month for unexplained fatigue that doctors couldn't diagnose. Doug felt sick. Kirk West hadn't just enabled Tanya's abuse of Emma. He'd been facilitating child abuse throughout their community. There's more, Detective Andrews continued. The DEA raided Kirk's storage unit yesterday. They found enough controlled substances to supply a small pharmacy. Kirk wasn't just skimming samples. He was stealing entire shipments from Meridian Pharmaceuticals. The detective slid another document across the desk. Kirk's been arrested on federal charges: drug trafficking, distribution of controlled substances to minors, theft of pharmaceuticals, and conspiracy to commit child endangerment. He's looking at 25 to life. Doug absorbed this information with grim satisfaction. Kirk West's crimes were far more extensive than anyone had realized. The man who had helped poison Emma was a major drug dealer who had endangered countless children. What about the other parents involved? All facing charges. The 6-year-old's mother has been arrested for child endangerment and aggravated child abuse. The others are being charged based on the evidence we've gathered. Detective Andrews leaned back in his chair. Doug, I want you to know that your decision to push for a full investigation probably saved other children's lives. If you just accepted Tanya's plea deal and moved on, we never would have uncovered Kirk's operation. That evening, Doug sat in his living room with Emma, who had finally been cleared to come home. She was still undergoing therapy to process the trauma of her mother's betrayal, but she was resilient and strong, qualities she'd inherited from Doug. Daddy, Why did Mommy give me those medicines? Emma asked during one of their quiet conversations. Doug had struggled with how to explain the situation in terms a 10-year-old could understand. Sometimes grown-ups make very bad choices, sweetheart. Mommy made choices that hurt you, and that was never okay. Is that why she can't live with us anymore? Yes. My job is to keep you safe, and I can't do that if someone who hurt you is in our house. Emma nodded solemnly. I like living with just you and Aunt Carrie helping. It feels safer. The custody hearing was a formality after the federal charges against Kirk were announced. The judge awarded Doug full custody with supervised visitation for Tanya, pending the completion of her criminal case and mandatory therapy. But Doug had one final revelation that would destroy any possibility of Tanya rebuilding her life. Working with Garrett Jordan, Doug had traced the timeline of Tanya's affair more precisely. What they discovered was that Tanya hadn't just been cheating. She'd been planning to leave Doug and take Emma with her. Garrett had found evidence that Tanya and Kirk had been looking at apartments together, researching custody laws, and even consulting with a lawyer about divorce proceedings, all while they were drugging Emma. She wasn't planning to stop the medication, Garrett explained. Based on the evidence, they were going to continue drugging Emma to manage her during the transition to their new life together. The most damning evidence was a text message from Tanya to Kirk. We'll have to keep giving her the pills until she adjusts to the new arrangement. Maybe we can wean her off them gradually once we're established. They had been planning to continue poisoning Emma indefinitely, treating her like an inconvenient obstacle to their happiness rather than a human being who deserved protection and love. Doug presented this evidence to the prosecutor handling Tanya's case. The revelation that she had been planning to continue the abuse as part of a broader scheme to abandon her marriage transformed her charges from simple child endangerment to conspiracy to commit aggravated child abuse. Tanya's plea deal was revoked. She would now face trial on felony charges that carried a potential sentence of 5 to 15 years in prison. When Tanya learned about the additional charges, she made one final desperate attempt to contact Doug. She called him from jail, begging for mercy. Doug, please. I know I made mistakes, but Emma is my daughter. I love her. I never meant for any of this to happen. Doug's response was cold and final. You stopped being Emma's mother the first time you poisoned her. You're nothing to us now. Please don't let them send me to prison. Emma needs her mother. Emma needs someone who protects her, not someone who hurts her. You had 12 years to be her mother, and you chose to be her abuser instead. Doug, I'm begging you. Save your begging for the judge. You're going to need it. Doug hung up and blocked Tanya's number. He had no interest in her pleas for mercy. She'd shown no mercy to Emma, and she would receive none from him. Chapter 8. Controlled Demolition. The trial began on a crisp October morning, 6 months after Emma's collapse. Doug sat in the gallery wearing his best suit, watching as Tanya was led into the courtroom in handcuffs. She looked smaller than he remembered, diminished by months of incarceration and legal proceedings. Kirk West was scheduled to be tried separately on federal charges, but his case had already made headlines throughout the region. Pharmaceutical rep-operated major drug ring, read the newspaper Doug had saved from the morning Kirk's arrest was announced. Tanya's defense attorney, a court-appointed lawyer named Pat Larson, had attempted to negotiate another plea deal, but the prosecutor was no longer interested in leniency. The evidence was overwhelming, and the additional charges related to Tanya's conspiracy with Kirk had eliminated any possibility of mercy. The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Dr. Hernandez testified about Emma's condition when she arrived at the hospital, explaining how close Emma had come to a potentially fatal overdose. Detective Andrews presented the timeline of abuse and the evidence of premeditation. Carrie Lawson's testimony was particularly damaging. She explained how Tanya had manipulated her into providing false alibis, and how Emma's innocent revelations had exposed the extent of the abuse. My sister asked me to lie for her, Carrie said from the witness stand. She told me it was for a surprise she was planning for Doug. I believed her because I trusted her. I never imagined she was using my lies to cover up the fact that she was drugging my niece. The defense tried to argue that Tanya was a victim of Kirk West's manipulation, portraying her as a naive woman who had been led astray by a sophisticated criminal. But the prosecution's evidence painted a different picture. Text messages between Tanya and Kirk showed that she had been an active participant in planning their affair and had enthusiastically embraced the idea of drugging Emma to facilitate their meetings. In several messages, Tanya had actually suggested increasing Emma's dosage when the child showed signs of waking up too early. The most damning evidence came from the surveillance recordings Wendell had captured. The jury listened in horrified silence as Tanya and Kirk discussed Emma's condition with casual indifference. "She's fine," Tanya's voice echoed through the courtroom. "She's just sleeping better than usual. Maybe if you'd found us a better place to meet, I wouldn't have needed to drug her so often," the recording continued. Doug watched the jury's faces as they processed the casual way Tanya discussed poisoning her daughter. Several jurors were visibly disturbed, and one woman was wiping away tears. When it came time for victim impact statements, Doug took the stand. "Emma is 10 years old," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion underneath. "She should be worried about homework and playground games and which friends to invite to sleepovers. Instead, she's in therapy trying to understand why her mother poisoned her." Doug looked directly at Tanya as he continued. "The defendant stole 6 weeks of my daughter's childhood. She put Emma's life at risk for the sake of sexual gratification. She turned our home into a place where Emma wasn't safe, even in her own bed. But the worst part isn't what she did, it's how she did it. She looked Emma in the eye every night and gave her poison while telling her it was medicine to help her feel better. She violated the most basic trust between a parent and child." Doug's voice grew harder. "The defendant has shown no genuine remorse. Even after Emma's hospitalization, she continued meeting with her accomplice to plan their future together. She saw Emma's suffering as a minor inconvenience, not a tragedy she had caused." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "Emma is a survivor. She's strong and brave and resilient. She will recover from this and live a full, happy life. But she will do it without the person who was supposed to protect her, because that person chose to hurt her instead." Doug stepped down from the witness stand without looking at Tanya again. He had said everything he needed to say. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours. They found Tanya guilty on all counts: aggravated child endangerment, conspiracy to commit child abuse, administration of controlled substances to a minor, and child abuse resulting in bodily harm. During sentencing, Judge Nicholas Roth addressed Tanya directly. "Mrs. Woods, I have presided over criminal cases for 15 years, and I have rarely seen such a callous disregard for a child's welfare. You systematically poisoned your own daughter for weeks, not out of mental illness or desperation, but for your own convenience and pleasure. The evidence shows that you were fully aware of the risks you were taking with Emma's life, yet you continued the abuse because it served your purposes. You showed no mercy to a helpless child, and this court will show none to you. I hereby sentence you to 12 years in state prison, with the possibility of parole after 8 years. You are permanently prohibited from unsupervised contact with any minor, including your daughter. Your parental rights are hereby terminated." The gavel fell with finality. Tanya collapsed into sobs as the bailiff approached to lead her away. She turned toward Doug with desperate eyes, but he was already walking out of the courtroom with Emma, who had been waiting in the hallway with Carrie. "Is it over, Daddy?" Emma asked as they walked to the parking lot. "It's over, sweetheart. You're safe now." Chapter 9: New Foundations. 2 years later, Doug stood in the backyard of their new house, watching Emma play with their neighbor's children. She was 12 now, taller and more confident, with no visible scars from the trauma she'd endured. The therapy had helped, but more importantly, she'd been surrounded by love and security ever since. The new house was in a different school district, a fresh start where Emma could grow up without the whispers and stares that had followed her in their old neighborhood. Doug had sold the construction business and started a smaller company that allowed him to work from home more often. Emma's well-being had become his priority above all else. Carrie still helped with childcare, and she'd become like a second mother to Emma. The rest of Tanya's family had initially tried to maintain relationships, But Doug had made it clear that anyone who supported Tanya's actions wasn't welcome in Emma's life. Family loyalty had limits, and those limits were Emma's safety and emotional health. Kirk West had been sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. His wife Veronica had moved across the country with their children, changing their names to escape the notoriety of their father's crimes. The last Doug had heard, Kirk's drug distribution network had been responsible for at least 12 cases of child endangerment, making him one of the region's most notorious criminals. Tanya had served 2 years of her sentence when she'd written to Doug, begging for a chance to see Emma. Doug had thrown the letter away without finishing it. Emma had never asked about her mother, and Doug wasn't going to volunteer information that might upset her healing process. He'd kept detailed records of everything: police reports, medical records, court transcripts, and evidence of Tanya and Kirk's crimes. If Emma ever wanted to know the full truth about what happened, he would share it with her when she was old enough to process it. But that would be Emma's choice, not his. The website exposing Kirk West remained active, updated with news of his conviction and sentencing. Doug occasionally received messages from other parents whose children had been endangered by Kirk's drug operation, thanking him for pursuing justice. The investigation that started with Emma's case had ultimately protected dozens of other children. Doug's phone buzzed with a text from Francis Brennan. Tanya's parole hearing is next month. Thought you should know. Doug deleted the message without replying. Tanya would likely be denied parole. Her crime involved a child, and she'd shown no genuine remorse during her incarceration. Even if she were released, the restraining orders and terminated parental rights meant she could never legally contact Emma. But Doug was prepared regardless. He'd build a new life for himself and Emma based on honesty, security, and unconditional love. Nothing Tanya could do would ever threaten that foundation again. "Daddy, come play with us." Emma called from the swing set Doug had installed the previous summer. Doug walked over and pushed Emma's swing, listening to her laughter echo through the afternoon air. This was what mattered. Not revenge or justice or punishment, but the simple joy of a child who felt safe and loved. "Higher, Daddy." Doug pushed harder, sending Emma soaring toward the sky. She squealed with delight, her face bright with happiness and trust. Some people might say Doug had been too harsh, too unforgiving in his pursuit of justice. They might argue that Tanya deserved compassion or second chances, that Kirk West's punishment was excessive. But those people hadn't sat in a hospital room watching their child struggle to survive after being poisoned by the person who was supposed to protect her. They hadn't heard recordings of 2 adults casually discussing drugging a child, as if she were an inconvenient pet. Doug had promised Emma that he would keep her safe, and he'd kept that promise. Tanya and Kirk had made their choices when they decided that their selfish desires were more important than a child's life. Now, they were living with the consequences of those choices. Emma jumped off the swing and ran to hug Doug's legs. "I love you, Daddy. I love you too, sweetheart. Forever and always." Doug looked at the house he'd built for them, not just the physical structure, but the life they'd created together. It was built on solid ground, with materials that would last, constructed to withstand any storm. Some foundations, once cracked, could never be repaired, but new ones could be built, stronger and more beautiful than what came before. Emma ran back to play with her friends, her laughter carrying on the wind. Doug smiled and went inside to start dinner, leaving the past buried where it belonged and focusing on the future he and Emma would build together. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen, and I'll see you there.